Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 65 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back Leah Rampy, who previously joined me in episode 41, but this time we're also joined by Beth Norcross to discuss their beautiful new book, Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees. Beth and Leah have worked together over several years, guiding groups into the forest to seek wisdom, understanding and guidance from the trees. This led to a 6-week online video course and ultimately culminated in their recently published book that offers us the opportunity to consider new ways of connecting with the lessons that trees have to share. The forest can teach us about love and light, but also about darkness and death. During these challenging threshold times that are calling us both as individuals and as society to examine the path we have walked and take responsibility for reimagining a vision for the future that is inclusive and nurturing to all beings, we can turn to the trees for more than just strength and support. Beth and Leah share the lessons they have discovered of resilience, adaptation, hope and renewal whilst amongst our tree folk. Their guidance on how to connect and collaborate more closely to listen and approach life with an open heart, shifting out of the mind and allowing the heart to guide us to move beyond our current confined perception of life and our illusion of separation. Through simple practices, they gently guide us into this remembering of how we can walk more consciously once more, rediscovering the relationships that were familiar to our ancestors and finding the courage to move through our discomfort to ensure we do what is ours to do. Welcome, Leah and Beth, to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really delighted to have you both on today to talk about your fantastic new book, Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees. It's no secret that I have a huge fondness for trees, and I'm delighted to have Leah back. We had an amazing conversation last year. I think it was episode 41 when we talked about your previous book, Earth and Soul, Reconnecting Amid Climate Chaos. But we're joined by your co-author today, Beth, and I'm going to start with Beth and ask you to share a little bit about your nature story. Just anything you'd like to share about how nature's been a part of your life, a fond memory, something just to get us started, and then we'll go on and share some of the lovely wisdom from your book.
Well, I have so many nature stories. When you ask that question, I start, reeling through them. But the one that just comes to mind in terms of how nature, it's a tree story, of course, but how nature has really been with me and I with it over the last many, many years. I don't think we included this in the book. I think it was on the cutting room floor, but I was in college. I had just been, I'm just a new freshman and was a little bit overwhelmed by the academic requirements and the new social situation and so forth. And it was a Southern college in North Carolina. And there was a big, beautiful magnolia behind our dorm, our crumbling dorm. And I decided that I just, looked up one day and I was being discouraged by the situation at hand, and something propelled me up that tree. There was magnolias are very climbable.
Yeah.
And so I scurried up that tree and got pretty high up there and just sat. And I remember so vividly, as if it were yesterday, just that perspective, that being in the tree allowed me, that whatever was going on below just didn't seem quite so oppressive, didn't seem quite so significant. And I really felt held by the branches of this tree. It really felt very maternal. And I found that I spent a lot of time in that tree in the time that I was at college. And as my perspective on life changed as I went through college, my time in the tree changed as well. But just that, and so many other examples throughout my life of trees, and I'll bet you have them too. The trees really being your go-to place when you need to be held and nurtured and supported.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I can just my grandma used to have a big magnolia in her garden and like you say the branches come quite low, don't they? So they're quite good for like scurrying up like you mentioned and just there's lovely energy in amongst the trees, isn't it? It's that sort of deep rooting and just being held and yeah, I love it. Nurtured, which is perfectly appropriate for my podcast by these beautiful beings. And I think, I mean, what led you both to combine to write your amazing book about trees?
Mm. Well, we've been collaborating for, oh gosh, somewhere between 5 and 10 years, and we don't really know. So we met each other probably 15 years ago or so, but Beth had started the Center for Spirituality and Nature that I thought was really an interesting endeavor. And we had prior to that time already shared our stories of how important the living world was to us in terms of our own spirituality and our growth and how much we cared about it. And um, I was trying to lead a lot of retreats and some pilgrimages around spirituality and the living world. And so Beth's founding of the center was really a beautiful thing. And over time, she invited me to co-lead some walks with her. And then we began to collaborate a little bit more. We developed a course about 5 years ago on the spiritual wisdom of trees. It's a 6 weeks video course that, because Beth has a friend who's a videographer, turned into a much bigger production, and I mean that literally, than we had anticipated. We
Is
love
that still available for
it
people?
is.
Yeah,
It
okay. Oh,
is.
lovely. So if
Yes.
people have read your book, they can go on and delve a little bit deeper even with you.
Well, that's right. And because we had this terrific videographer, you would actually see videos of some of the things we're talking about, so you don't have to just imagine what we might mean by a particular oak or a
Yeah.
Douglas fir or whatever, because she's
Oh,
giving
beautiful.
that to you in images as well. So we thought that was pretty terrific. It definitely turned into something more than talking heads on our video. And yes, we started offering that course as a self-paced course, but also we would sometimes invite people in to Zoom with us to be in discussion about it. And we were just really energized by how important that was to people, how they felt like they had come home to
Mhm.
find the trees and also people who appreciated them in the same way that they did. I guess it's something we don't talk about maybe a lot. We don't bring into our daily conversation how much trees are meaning to us and how much
Yeah.
they guide us.
Yeah.
And so, so that was really affirming. And maybe Beth, maybe I'll let you pick it up
Yeah, I think
about broadleaf.
it's it that is what's beautiful about your book is that you weave all of these stories, don't you? And you come, I mean, I loved when you talked about how important trees have been like to human. I mean, that was one of the things you said trees have been around since before humans, and then you go back through all of our cultures and actually how they're so importantly woven into our sort of belief systems as these
Hmm.
spiritual centers of knowledge and some of the ancient, I think you mentioned the Celtic and also the Tree of Life. And that's
Hmm.
really, it's really fascinating because, like you said, Lee, we don't really think about that, do we? We don't think about how we've kind of evolved alongside them, really.
Hmm. Yeah.
And just to finish that story, at least we both felt that there was more that we wanted to share, and we wanted to share it more broadly. As Leah said, we saw how touched and moved people were by just being together to draw more deeply into these relationships. And Broadleaf Books approached us and said, "We see this class. It looks very interesting. Would you like to write
Wow.
something more about that? And of course, they didn't have to ask us twice. And Leah and I had worked together enough to know that it would be a really wonderful collaboration, which it was. It was, I think, a better book because we were both in it. And as you know, when there are two or more, right, there was a third entity that came and really just propelled this forward in what we hope is a beautiful way. I would mention also that, one of the reasons that I think I wanted to write this book, and I'm guessing Leah did as well, is that, you know, we couldn't have anticipated the chaos that the US now
Yeah.
finds itself in. But there were, many, many challenges, particularly the challenge of climate change.
Mhm.
And we saw firsthand how trees can offer these lessons in resilience and adaptation and hope and renewal. And we wanted to share that wisdom.
Yeah.
And now, of course, we're in a very different situation than we even imagined. So we're
Yeah.
so hoping this book can be helpful and hopeful to people as they grapple with these, what only can be called existential challenges that we're facing right now.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I love the fact that you have come together to create this book as well, because that's kind of one of the central themes is how trees collaborate with each other. So it seems like it's sort of perfect that the book itself was a collaboration and sort of that honors the wisdom of the trees just in even that foundation.
I love that you say that, Fiona. I don't think anybody else has sort of lifted that up and brought it to the fore. And it was a collaboration in the sense of some of the examples we offer about trees, and not to take it too far, but the idea of sharing with each other and giving feedback and um, learning as we went along
Yeah.
from what the other person was doing, and in some way, um, holding our own individual styles and perspectives and still melding those in a way that we felt was right.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what trees are doing all the
Yeah.
time. Not writing a book, but they are writing a beautiful story.
Yeah.
And maintaining their own identities and their own
Mm-hmm.
purpose and their own value.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bringing
that's a
each individual strength, isn't it, to the collective.
Absolutely. Hmm. Absolutely. Somebody asked me that in a retreat I was leading a week ago. Are trees really more about individuals, or are they more about being in community? And the answer, of course, is yes. They are individuals, and they are deeply rooted, and they are about growing and about feeding their livelihood. And and they are also taking care of the whole forest, because it requires the woods for them to thrive. And so it's a reminder.
Yeah, I think like Beth touched on, we are struggling with some really tumultuous times at the moment, and I think and a lot of it stems from this kind of real sense of separation and trying and sort of isolationism, isn't it? It's harking back to some sort of previous history of isolationism and separation from each other. And actually, you share a lot of wisdom in your book about how that's really sort of completely counterintuitive to how trees behave and how they react to everything around them and how they work in community, isn't it?
Mhm. Yeah. Trees don't go it alone. And there are stories, as you've pointed out, about individuals speaking about how sad it is to see a lone pine and how lonesome the pines look. And
Yeah.
stories from indigenous peoples of walking past a lone tree that would whisper to them of their loneliness and ask them to plant
Yeah.
companions around them. And so I think we kind of intuitively know that trees like to be together, but we've sort of paved that over and forgotten in the same way we've forgotten how much a part of this living world we are, how we are inextricably woven, and how we cannot be separate.
Yeah.
So when we go to the wisdom of trees, they're reminding us about the importance of connection.
Yeah, and I think Beth, I think it was maybe one of your chapters that you talked quite a lot about wounding, and you talked about the beautiful tree with the heartwood missing, and I just found that really poignant, especially at the moment with a lot of us who are probably feeling the weight of everything that's going on in the world, and the fact that the trees do have this beautiful capacity to remind us of resilience. I shared with you both a picture of an amazing tree that is fairly local to me, and she is just incredible in that it's almost just the bark that curves up on one side, and most of the tree has disappeared, and she still stands meters into the air and carries a full canopy
Yeah.
every summer. It's just incredible. And I think right now, to sort of, if you wanted to speak a little bit into that sort of nature of resilience and I guess pain, really, isn't it? And how we can move beyond that. So,
Well, yes, and yes, and thank you for sharing your tree picture. It comes up and then it gets very, very thin, and then it comes back again. It's really quite an amazing thing. And I would just encourage all of your listeners and us to go out, even in our local parks or our backyard, and see if a tree attracts you. We've talked in the book about tree teachers and Anam Kara's soul friends, to see what that tree has, what wisdom she has for you in a particular day, because they are so. I was out on a walk with a group on Saturday, and we saw the most magnificent examples of resilience, and we can in fact take these trees as models for how we might bear up, not only by holding on to the banks, as we saw these sycamores holding on to the banks of the Potomac River, and the trees winding and whirling their way always toward the light, but also the adaptations your tree had to make, and so many trees that we see who are resilient. It will require adaptation, and that's one of the things that I think is hardest for us now as we confront the environmental crisis, as we confront climate change, is to understand our part in that, and the adaptations, the transformations that we're going to have to make, that we are in the midst of making, if we are going to continue our collective journey to the light. Leah, I'll let you speak to the woundedness and bringing our grief
Mm.
into nature. I think you spoke to that in the book.
yeah, Leah's got her first book as well, Earth and Soul, is
Right.
very much focused on how we can hold this huge grief that we and not turn away from it, because I think that's the tendency, is it can feel so overwhelming. It's how do we face it and hold it, and then be able to create from that,
Mhm.
isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think we don't tend to live in a society or maybe even in communities where we have good grief rituals and practices. And we have this conversation frequently about closure, as if, there's a certain thing that could happen and then your grief would come to an end, and you would no longer feel it. And of course, that denies the reality. And as you and I've talked before, Fiona, there is a lot to be said for allowing grief to really enter us and to break our hearts wide open, and to trust that our hearts are big enough to hold more grief, And in doing that, then we increase our capacity for more joy and beauty and awe and wonder and love, compassion. And, it doesn't mean that that makes the grief go away. It's not a path of, oh gosh, I should feel grief, so then I will get to. It is a both and. And of course, the trees have borne witness to some pretty horrific things. And we talk a little bit about that in the book, about trees that have witnessed so much violence perpetuated by people on each other and on trees. There are hanging trees that have borne witness to atrocities that are really unspeakable. And trees are bearing witness to clear cuts happening all around them. And trees are still amazingly rooted and define really a sense of beauty and commitment to stay. Those deep roots hold on. I don't know how many, probably many listeners have seen a tree that's been cut down, and yet there's all these sprouts coming back out, or a tree that's been cut down and it's perhaps crumbling into soil and still nurturing other plants. And of course, Beth talks about, all the weaving of trees that they do to reach the light. I mean, they are committed. They are committed to being resilient, even as there is this grief. And so never to deny it, but to remind us that trees can be a source of how we stay through really hard times and persist through really hard times and still do what is ours to do. Because that's what a tree is doing, right? It is being a tree in its full sense. It is totally committed to being a tree. And I think sometimes our thinking minds get in our way and we flounder around of like, what is me? What is mine to do? And and there's this calling to be our truest self that trees remind us of all the time we are among them.
Yeah, I love
Had
that.
I had the occasion last summer before last, to co-lead a group of climate and faith activists up with the BTS Center up in Maine. And these folks, they're on the front lines, and they were tired, haggard, worn out,
Exhausted.
burned
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And where did they go? They went to the woods. And it was just such a privilege to be with them. But I noticed a couple of things, and we had a variety of practices that we encouraged them to do. And one of them was a grief exercise where they took their grief to the trees, and we were encouraged them to allow the forest, or ask the forest to hold that grief with them and for them. And this particular forest was itself uh, a function of being cut over by a voracious timber harvesting effort 100 years before. And so this forest itself was never to be an old growth forest again for millennia, probably. And so here it was, still growing, still thriving, still providing in its own sort of second growth kind of way. And here were these haggard activists. And it was as if the forest was saying, we've seen destruction, we've seen decay, we've seen our forest completely cut down, and yet we're standing, and we encourage you to stand too.
Yeah.
And it was the most beautiful thing to hear their reflections coming out of that, recognizing that we don't have to hold the grief and the loss alone, even within our human species, that we can go to earth and grieve with it, heal with it. It was such a lovely example of how the woods can comfort and heal and offer hope. in the way that this formerly cut over
Mm.
beautiful spruce pine forest did those days.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is a beautiful part of your book is just starting to really recognize that we are beings in this greater web of beingness, and there is so much beyond the human species that has this ability to connect with us, and we can connect with, and it can support us, and we can co-create with it as well. I think that's also another very important thing, is realizing that, that all of the sort of solutions that we want to, or we hope to find, to be able to, continue forward in a less destructive manner as a society, no necessarily have to come from us, but actually they can be guided by this beautiful web of beingness that we are a part of.
Yeah,
So
unfortunately, I think we've seen some examples where we have sort of rushed in to try to save something and made it worse.
Yeah.
So we haven't really listened to what's ours to do.
I think that message is, or that understanding is slowly starting to
Yeah.
percolate into the sort of mainstream. I don't know that I told you this, Leah, but I was in a little, there's a little town called Luray, Virginia, which is a very rural town, not too far from where Leah and I have property. And I was in a restaurant, a very modest restaurant in this very tiny town in the middle of the mountains of Western Virginia. And I was writing, I was in the middle of writing the book, and I had some book on trees that I was reading at the time. And the waiter, the young waiter, uh, said to me, she said in her accent, her deep Southern accent, which I will not try to imitate, she said, she said, trees talk to each other. And I was so astounded that this woman who was far away from, liberal Northern Virginia, D.C. area, had, she said, there's a lady who talks about that. I can only imagine it was Suzanne Simard. And she gave me a pretty good description of her understanding of mycelial networks and so forth. And I
Yeah.
was so overjoyed in this little tiny place that somehow that notion of interconnectivity between the trees, between us and the trees, well, it was such a great example of of hope and how
Yeah.
we are beginning to understand these connections.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a growing tide, I think, isn't there, of
Mhm.
sort of collective awareness of the sort of greater web of life. The research that's been done about what's it, they call it the wood wide web, don't they? Is the lovely term for it, of how all of these species, the mycelium, and like this whole network under the ground, like communicates with each other. And it's yeah, it is just, I mean, I find it like exciting that actually we're just kind of on the cusp of really understanding trees. And you mentioned, I think, several times in the book that there's still so many mysteries about how even trees sort of survive, that we we just still don't even understand, and their incredible capacity to, well, move gallons of water up hundreds of feet against gravity. And just it's just, they are just amazing, incredible beings. And one of the things that I was really touched by your book is that you quite often, in several places, you made reference really to sort of awareness around our language. And in our sort of human Western language, English in particular, we often, we've been taught to refer to what would be seen as non-humans as it. And also, you also brought awareness to the idea of, not using trees for our own, to serve us, but to actually really sort of come into a much greater sense of reciprocity with them, and work much more in partnership with them, rather than being like, oh, they serve us by producing oxygen or reducing flooding, and so therefore we're going to plant them to serve us and our needs. But actually, we need to start, like you were just saying, about coming into this deeper conversation with them, and working with them and understanding what they need to thrive as well, because we've got that wrong quite a few times in the past, haven't we?
Well, I think you're pointing to that word kinship.
Yeah.
And there are a number of Indigenous authors who bring that to the fore and speak about concentric ecology, or the importance of seeing the living world as kin. Robin Wall Kimmerer points out that we're the younger brothers and sisters, because, as you've already said, Fiona, the trees have been here much longer than we have. So they have established themselves through a whole variety of changes. I mean, intense changes. And they remain here. Clearly, to be able to do that, you must have gained some wisdom about how to thrive amid really, really challenging times. And of course, it's not just trees, it's so many other beings that have been here before we came to be this last little leaf on the tree of life. And that can be challenging, because even though it's a relatively short period of time, considering, the vast amount of time Earth has been here, this last short period of time, we have been very clearly living into that story of separation, as you've already pointed out, that we are distinct and different, that we are above. It's a very ecocentric and the story of separation. And of course, there is, when we pause and look, there is nothing that shows us that individuals live without water, air, plants, the microbiome that's within and around us. I mean, we cannot live alone, and yet somehow we have maintained this mythology.
Yeah.
It's not serving us.
You spoke about language, and it really is very deeply grained in all of us. And Leah and I have been at this for a long time. And at some point in the book, I did a search of the word it, and found that we had ourselves fallen into that a number of times. And so as much as we're trying to make this turn, and we're asking others to make this turn as well. But I wanted to just recognize that it will be challenging and difficult. And as I said earlier, this adaptation that the trees are making to sustain their own life and the life of the forest. What changes, what adaptations are we going to make, even among the most well-meaning of us? What are our lives and lifestyles really? I think the trees are asking us to take a good, hard, long look. I see, as Leah knows, and I point this out sometimes, I see behind me all of these books made of a variety of different kinds of paper.
I was going to say, in the background of all of us, we've got a whole forest, haven't we?
The wooden framing. And I've become, having finished the book now and done a few of these podcasts, I've become very aware of, I almost have to apologize to the trees when I put a new ream of paper in. It's recycled still. It originated from the trees. And so what does that mean? We didn't talk about it much in the book, but this notion of confession and apology and seeking redemption from our lives and lifestyles that are really affirming the itness, our sense of the itness, just the use of the word resource.
Yeah. It is really hard, isn't it? I think, and I'm so grateful to you for bringing that up and sort of confessing that even like, people who have a huge awareness of it, we're not perfect. Like we're all still struggling with this, wrestling with this sort of way that we have sort of been brought up really and educated, and it's sort of so deeply ingrained. And yes, you're sort of a step ahead perhaps than some people in terms of your awareness for it, but it is just, it's a journey and it's a constantly evolving practice. I think practice is a great word for it, that we are always working. And I love the quote that we sort of, we do the best we can until we know better, and then we do better. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's having this awareness of the fact that our society has developed along the lines it has by being separate from these resources, as you just mentioned, so that we were able to use them without thought or feeling really, or any
Mhm.
guilt around it. And now, obviously there's been a degree of like, sort of, in vegetarianism, veganism, a degree of awareness around sentience in animals. And now we're having to actually say, well, maybe there's some sentience in plants and trees, and not just maybe, but there there is. And it's, and then that brings other waves of consideration, doesn't it? And how we live. And I think that brings us back to sort of towards the end of your book, and you really dive into reciprocity. And I think that's where we can find some sort of sense of balance in, yes, we will need to continue to use wood in certain aspects of our lives, but how we can do it in a way that is much more in balance and less harmful and destructive than how we have been doing it.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, there's a place in the book where I share an audit I did of what it would take for the building of the place that I live, which is
Yeah.
relatively small compared to a lot of homes. What is it? I went room by room and identified where there was wood. Um, and it was pretty shocking to me how many trees
Yeah.
it took for me to live the way I'm living right now. What I think we're speaking of is being mindful, being
Yeah.
attentive, being aware of what we're doing and making a choice based on an open-hearted sense of that being a living being, you know. So it is much easier for us to maintain that cultural illusion of separation and other, because if we don't, if we start calling trees she and he, and they're not its, if we stop referring to resources and property and ecosystem services, then we have to move into the territory where we really examine what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that can be really uncomfortable. It was not fun for me to
No.
do that audit, you know. Um, and, we can feel really defensive pretty quickly about it. So the choices that we make over and over again about how we live are really a part of that reciprocity. That's part of that seeing the gifts that we are given moment by moment from the trees of the world and all other beings, by the way. But we're speaking of trees. They are gifting us over and over and over again, moment by moment, cleaning the air, purifying the water, um, giving the gift of wood, nurturing the forests and all other beings. And for us then to feel, to attend to that creates, we hope, a feeling of gratitude. And then out of that gratitude, it's not enough to only say thank you, as important as that is. It's also important to say, then what is my
Yeah.
response?
Yeah.
Fiona, if you have given something to me out of your heart and your very being,
Yeah.
then what is it that I feel called to give back? And, that is a real kind of soul searching practice that can fly in the face of our current paradigm.
Yeah, I think that's really, it's so important. And I know that you do talk about as well, like how we can sort of move forward, and I don't want to say repair, because it's not about repairing. You talk about that concept in your book as well, about like restoring is quite uh a big concept in its own right, and we have to be careful in trying to like reverse things, and actually it's about co-creating forward. And an
Mhm.
old growth forest, once it's gone, is never going to be an old growth forest again. It's going to be a second growth forest. But I know one thing that you did particularly highlight is really, really the importance we need to draw to protecting these old growth ancient forests. And whilst tree planting is fantastic within reason and realms, it can't ever replace
Mhm.
the depth of everything that is held within an old growth forest that we literally don't even understand, do we? I think that's really what it comes down to. We have not even got a full understanding of what we're losing, and it's highly important that we focus on protecting that, and we don't see tree planting as a way to just sort of salve our conscience, I suppose, of losing those
Mhm.
forests.
Mhm.
I mean, I know
Mhm.
in this country we had a big infrastructure project that was going ahead, and I actually wrote to my government MP and said, "Oh, I'm quite concerned you're going to be cutting down several ancient woodlands." And the standard reply I got in return was, "We're planting lots of,
Mhm.
saplings."
Mhm.
And I politely tried to explain that while saplings are lovely, they are, no substitute for an ancient woodland.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the magic of forests, as Beth knows, is a passion of mine because especially old growth forests have just an incredible, incredible offering. It's the ecosystem, and we're missing when we do that, when we think we can go in and take out the largest trees and leave the rest, or when we think we can, clear cut, but only a section and we'll plant back. We're missing the relationships. And trees are, above all, related to each other, to all of that soil and network that we've been talking about below, to the birds and the caterpillars and the insects. I mean, it is an ecosystem, and it is an ecosystem of which we also are a part.
Yeah,
And as long as we keep uh, narrowing down to only seeing individuals like individual trees and missing the importance of that relationship, we will not get it right. We will not create a world or we will destabilize a world and create chaos. Um, it will not work to eliminate our forests.
yeah,
Forests are feeding Earth.
yeah,
It's not simply that the forest is feeding the creatures who are living there. Forest is maintaining Earth's systems. They are inextricably linked to Earth. So,
that little it
It's
snuck in there.
yeah, it did, didn't it? What?
just,
Well, it's a
I,
practice. It's a practice. And Beth and I both took this practice on as a way to help us keep shifting
Yeah,
our paradigms. And we're still learning.
yeah,
well, and the truth of the matter is, each tree is a she or he or they.
yeah,
They're either feminine or masculine, or in many cases, the trees have both masculine and feminine. Uh, I wanted to come back to something you said about vegetarianism, and both Leah and I are both mostly vegetarian, and but I think it's so much um, easier to see the suffering of sentient beings and say, I don't want to be any part of a chicken being in a little tiny
yeah,
cage, hardly big enough for her to move around. I don't want to be any part of that. Um, However, to and it's clear to see that those animals are suffering.
yeah,
So, what does it mean for a forest to suffer? They may not experience sentience the way that we might, or a chicken or a cow might, but that forest that's being dismantled and unraveling is suffering in a very dramatic way. Its health is being undermined. It. I don't know if we came up with a good word for forest, a good pronoun.
They.
They.
Yeah.
But the forest is in fact suffering. And one of the practices that we put up in the book has really been very meaningful to a number of people is this: what is it like to be you?
Okay, yeah.
Practice. And more often than not, when we ask people to do that, they come back and they found something, an ant or a robin or a fox or something that they can really relate to, or they feel they can relate to more personally. But in a tree, it's a really different exercise. At the end of that practice, we ask people to say, what are you afraid of? And is there anything that I'm doing that's harming you? And so just to redefine the notion of suffering and what it means for, I was going to say non-sentient, but I'm not sure we understand sentience
No,
as broadly enough.
I think it's
But those trees, there's kinds of critters and creatures that don't experience sentience in the same way that we might. What does it mean to suffer? And what does it mean for us to be a part of that and to be causing suffering?
yeah, I think
It's an interesting question.
it is a really interesting question, and I think it comes back to this like um just we're still just scratching the surface of our understanding of trees. I don't know if you know the actress Dame Judi Dench. She loves
Sure.
trees, and she did a fantastic program many years ago now. I think it's probably over 5 years ago. And she had someone, and they strapped a sort of listening device to the trunk of a tree in her garden. And I was listening to it, and I was like, oh my goodness, it sounded like a heartbeat. And it was just like, and we were like, it just, I think it was sort of as they were, there was the waters and the thing pumping around but it sounded like listening to a human heartbeat. And I think this is the thing we are learning more. You mentioned Susanna's wonderful book and the mother tree, and the wonderful work that's being done to understand how forests and woodlands connect to each other, and the importance of their community. Like, you can't then, it's not an individual tree in a forest. It's, so deeply connected, and the survival of all of them depends on all of them. It's, you can't separate them. And it is our lack of understanding, I think, that we have got to the place we are now, and it's developing this sense of curiosity, which I think is a lot of the lovely practices in your book are about getting people to sort of curious and ask questions. And I wonder if you would speak, you have your book is split into these lovely chapters where you consider different ideas, and at the end of each one you have a lovely exercise for people to engage with. But the first one that you do is you encourage people to find a tree that they can connect with, and it becomes your teacher tree. I wonder if you would mind just sharing how someone might sort of consider finding the tree that they can connect with. And obviously we won't share any more of your exercises, and they have to go and get your books so that they can partake in all of the rest. But perhaps if you just share how you do it. I mean, I'm very blessed to have a couple of trees that I've sat with extensively, and it is a very special experience. So I'd love for you to share that, so that our listeners could perhaps immediately go out and go and sit with a tree and begin their relationship.
Good. I love that. Would you like to do that, Beth?
Oh, nice. You always do that so beautifully. I'll give it a try. I think that we've led so many walks. I can't speak for Leah, but I bet the same is true with her. I've never had someone come back and say, I just couldn't, find a teacher tree.
Yeah.
And I think you go out to some place that is close to your home so you can get to her or him. we actually love we do a program together called Pilgrimage to Your Own Backyard, where we begin to see our own backyards, local parks, and so forth as sacred ground.
Yeah.
And so find a place where you can wander close to your home and open your heart. We have an exercise later where we run through the senses, tuning the five-stringed harp, as Leah would say.
Yeah, I think we
Open our
shared that in
eyes.
the first conversation actually that Leah and I had. So if people go back and listen to that episode, they can delve into that one as well.
This notion of, we toggle back and forth between our senses, but really going out into a forest or a woodland or a park, or as I said, your own backyard. And what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you touch? Trees are wonderful, tactile, beings. And then we would encourage you to taste, only if you were quite certain what you're tasting. But you can taste the air around the tree and see what emerges. It's not so much, for me anyway, a question of you're finding a tree, but a tree finding you. And there's never been a time when I've opened myself that some tree doesn't say, hey, hey. And it's been, the hundreds-year-old sequoias in the Sequoia National Park, these enormous beings. Uh, and then a scraggly little pine tree that's not far from my home here that I go and visit. And she just looks like she's going to topple any moment. And there are times when that's the Anamkara, that's the soul tree, that's the teacher whom I need, because there are times when I feel like that too, where I'm just a little wind is going to topple me over. So I think it's an openness, a contemplative, a grounding. We talk at some point in the book about Cynthia Bourgeot recommends that if we're lost in thought, that we say, where are my feet? Where are my feet? So we walk in a forest mindfully of our feet touching the ground, perhaps a mantra, open, I am here, and listen with eyes, ears, mouth, fingers, and a tree will come to you. I don't know, Leah, have you ever had an occasion where we've led these groups and
No, no. There's
they're
always an
just
invitation. Yeah.
They
they're
have an
out there just
incredible
waiting for us.
generosity, I think, don't they, of spirit and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think I, I think I mean I talk a lot on my podcast about sort of opening to like other ways of communicating and other ways of knowing and other ways of being in the world. And I think this is another invitation to that, to just slow down and disconnect from how we have been taught to perceive the world and realize that there is a completely different way of existing in this world. And this is your book and your exercises are a beautiful invitation for people to gently start to deepen into that different way of being and existing. And that's why I love it so much and definitely recommend that everyone should read it, because it's very easy to read, very easy to digest, and you have these lovely um exercises that you can go and partake with the trees and just experience life in a way we haven't really been encouraged to experience life. And I
Mm-hmm.
think from that we then have this amazing capacity to gain wisdom and co-create, to create a world to move forward
Mm-hmm.
into. I am very conscious that we are sort of approaching the hour, and I know that I could speak to you both but countless more hours, because there is so much wisdom that the trees have shared with you both, which you have then, managed to distill into the pages of this book to share with us. But as we sort of round up, would either of you, is there anything else that you feel that you would like to particularly share that you feel called to share with people today, to leave them with some thoughts and feelings?
There is, I'll let Leah have the final word. I always like to point out that the forest teaches us so much, and particularly about not only life and light, but also darkness and death.
Yeah.
And I was again walking the other day and noticed there are so many trees that, through our definition, are no longer living. They're no longer producing cells and lignin and all the things that make a tree go. And yet, we talk in the book about these nurse logs, and that every log that was decaying out in the forest was also becoming home to an array of mosses, lichen, fungi, and saplings. And so in the so-called natural world, there's no death has no finality.
Yeah.
And I just think that's extraordinary and such a sign of hope, particularly now. I live about 3 or 4 miles from the White House, by the way,
Oh,
and where lots of stuff is coming out that could potentially unravel our forests. And yet I watch the forest encompass and take in death in the most natural way. And it says, no, it says, this is not the final word. Life is the final word. Life has the final word in the forest and for us. And right now, I can't begin to tell you how much hope that gives me as to what's going to emerge out of all of this destruction and decay and cruelty that we see now. Is there something being born under the ground in the
darkness,
decay of an old oak? What's happening there that's being prepared for us? So I would just, that was a very long
no,
soliloquy
it was
on death.
beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful, Beth. A beautiful remembering of that, even in these times which feel immeasurably dark to many of us, that, I think at the start of your book, you talk about the acorn, and in the darkness, it has to be in the darkness before it can grow and become what it is destined to become. And I think for many of us, the darkness is feeling quite oppressive at the moment. And actually, there are lessons that the trees can give us as we move through these threshold times, as Leah refers to them, to hold that light, to hold that belief that, it isn't the end. Like, it's a beautiful remembering that even with death, things do not end. There is new life that comes forth.
Leah, did you want to?
I would just add, don't, this is for listeners, for your listeners, Fiona, and thank you for sharing them with us. I would just invite you to not make this hard. Don't think that there is some special ear that Beth and I have that you need to develop. Simply go out to a tree and open your attention. Contemplatives have a saying of mind and heart. Drop your busy mind into your heart, open your heart, because your heart listens in a different way. And we all know that. We know that because of our relationships with each other. Listen with your heart. Beth gave you some great questions to ask. Get over the idea that this is silly, and if you have to imagine that to get there, that's okay. If you have to imagine that this is possible, that trees have something to say to you, then go there from your imagination. Allow the possibility. I was just thinking as Beth was talking of Rilke's beautiful poem of Gravity's Law. And when that's translated by Joanna Macy, it says something along the lines of, if we would surrender ourselves to Earth's wisdom, we would rise uprooted like trees. So that's the invitation, to surrender. All the yes, but, all the maybe, all the I have to do's, the long lists, to go to a tree, surrender to that wisdom, and allow ourselves to be not only informed, but to be changed by what we can learn from the other beings in this world. And then that rootedness that we are so desperate for in these times that are kind of blowing us around in the wind, that rootedness can begin to happen. And that's a gift too, for sure. So I'll stop with that. Thank you, Fiona. You're right. We could talk for a long time, and we really appreciate that opportunity to talk with you.
Oh, I love that. And just to remind everyone that your book is called Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees. I'm going to have links to find out more about both of you, to connect with you both as well in the podcast show notes, so people can find you easily. And I just want to thank you both for sharing your beautiful wisdom and the wisdom from the trees with us today as well. It is for some people, I think, something new. For some of us, it's something that is a remembering as well of perhaps what we felt and experienced more naturally in childhood. I think a lot of us have these moments like you started, as we've come full circle, Beth, to your lovely description of your magnolia tree when in your younger days. And we did have this innate, intrinsic sort of being drawn and connection to nature, and it's about just getting curious and opening ourselves back up to this, where we've been told it's, perhaps silly or, in our imagination, but to start listening to the whispers that come into our heart and into our minds when we are in nature, and realizing that may well be the beings around us communicating in the way that they can and are able. So I just can't thank you enough, and it's been absolutely lovely speaking with you both, and I hope that lots of people will find their way to your book, and it will be another stepping stone as we move as a society towards something new, and we move out of this current darkness, hopefully, towards something that we co-create alongside nature.
Well, thank you so much. What a lovely conversation. I so appreciate it.
Deep bow of gratitude. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.